Welcome to the Navseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 106 of our little podcast. My name is Dr. David C. Noe, and I am here in the basement of the Vomitorium South, with my good friend and fantastic co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How are you, Jeff?
I'm feeling good. I was wondering if you're going to get my middle initial in there.
Of course.
You introduce yourself with the C. Yeah, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. You got the Christmas holidays coming up.
It's coming up.
End of the semester kind of craziness is almost over.
Right.
So no, I'm feeling really
excellent.
Feeling good. How about yourself?
Well, I want to just say the T stands for tremendous.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Jeffrey Tremendous Winkle.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What does the C stand for?
We already know this, right?
We do?
Curmudgeon.
Gotcha.
Crotchety. Something like that.
But you're doing all right?
I am doing well.
Okay.
I got a lot of resonance again. If you can hear that in my voice,
I can hear that, yeah.
Fighting a little bit of a cold.
It's going around.
There's not a lot upstairs this afternoon, I'll have to say.
Oh, no, okay.
But the voice is doing well.
All right. Good deal. So what are we doing today?
We're going to continue on, and we're going to wrap up Book 7 of Virgil's Aeneid.
Yep.
We're going to get all the parties arrayed on the battlefield. Aeneas is going to bring out the Latin host and the Trojan host, and we're going to be introduced to one of the most fascinating characters in the epic.
Who's that? One
of my favorites. This is a young woman who played a chicken on The Muppet Show, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that right? Who
is this? Gonzo's pet chicken, don't you remember?
I wasn't a big Muppets guy.
Camilla.
Right. That was the name of the chicken on The Muppet Show?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But yeah, Camilla in the Aeneid is a force to be reckoned with.
She's incredible.
Yes.
Incredible. Yep. And we're going to meet her here at the end of this book,
yes.
Correct?
Yep. So we sadly do not have a shout out today.
No, we don't.
Okay. So just another gentle nudge to the audience.
Right.
Drop us a note.
We've been getting some good correspondence, some of which we still have to answer.
Right.
Cough, cough.
Lots of really interesting ideas for future episodes. So keep those coming too.
Fascinating suggestions. But as for shout outs, we're plumb out.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, shall we dive in?
Let's do that.
Dive right in, okay?
And what are we giving the people today?
We're going to wrap up Book 7.
Yes.
If the listener listened to the previous episode, we talked at some length about Turnus's armor.
Correct.
And the imagery on the armor. And we're going to get to that scene today.
Mm-hmm.
And the opening quote that we have lined up is another one kind of commenting on this. And so this is something that I think we're going to lead off with and more or less kind of end with as well.
Right.
Yep.
And the general theme for today's episode is the character of the god Janus, right?
Yes.
And this is the two-faced god who presides over the temple, which is called the Temple of War, the Gates of War.
Yes.
And when his gates are opened and there's a special ritual, then the Romans march to war.
That's right. And we get more or less kind of the origin story of that.
Exactly.
Today. Yep.
So you have the opening quote, and it's from a guy named Stuart Smalley. Is that right?
Yeah, Stuart Small. It struck me too. You remember Stuart Smalley?
Yes, I do. It was played by Senator Franken, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. He was good enough, smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me.
That's
right?
correct.
Yes.
So this is from TAPA, which is the Transactions of the American Philological Association.
Right, which is no longer the American Philological.
No, it's
the Society for Classical Studies.
Correct.
Right.
This is a 1959 article. It's amazing. Volume 90.
They've been around for a long
1959,
time.
they were on volume 90. If I'm not mistaken, this journal was founded by Basilino Gildersleeve.
The man himself.
Yes, great American Latinist.
Yeah.
And so you're going to read the opening quote on the arms of Turnus,
right.
Correct?
Yes. So Mr. Small writes, from another point of view, it must be admitted that the Io emblem gives the reader a much more favorable impression of Turnus's character than does the fire-breathing chimera. So in this article, I chose this section. He goes on at length at the beginning about the chimera. So there's two images on Turnus's armor, the chimera and Io.
And if I may interrupt for just a second,
yep.
Some of our listeners who are perhaps a little less polished than others, and I know that you're all brilliant, they may think that you're saying chimero and not chimera or chimera.
Oh, suggesting that Turnus had kind of a late 80s sports car?
That's right, like a Trans Am with the T-tops.
Actually, I can actually see Turnus driving that around.
Yes, I can too. Right. Like an early Knight Rider sort of thing.
Right.
But no, you're saying chimera.
Chimera, right.
Right, which is a creature, a fantastic creature that is the combination of several other creatures.
Yes, there's a lion, there's an eagle, sometimes a goat.
Right.
And a snake.
The hippogriff.
Yeah,
Throw a horse in there, throw a bird in there. These are your chimeric creatures, like
Yes.
the Minotaur, man and bull is another one.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Right. So Small has already spent a few pages talking about how the chimera is emblematic of kind of the rage of Turnus,
Right.
and kind of represents his prowess as a warrior on the battlefield. And now he's kind of shifted to looking at Io. Says the chimera is bestial and monstrous from first to last, whereas Io is a human being who has been transformed into the shape of a heifer. Even after the alteration of her outward shape, she retains her human mind and soul. This is true of Turnus as well. For all of his violence and unreason, he is never dehumanized altogether. Likewise, both Io and Turnus are victims of divine interference. Io, we recall, was first animalized by Jupiter's lust, and then tormented by the jealousy and spite of Juno, who plagued her with the sleepless watchman Argus, and thereafter drove her mad by sending a tormenting gadfly in pursuit of her. So we talked a bit about that
Yes.
in the last episode.
Yeah, we recapped the story for the listener as we were talking about Turnus's shield.
Right. And maybe this might be repetitive from last time, but that striking detail is that we also noticed that Io is also linked to the mythic family
Correct.
of the Latins, right? Or
That's
the
right.
Rutulians.
Inachus.
Right? And so there's that familial connection that I think neither this author or I think it was M.R. Gale that we quoted last time noticed. But this detail that I find striking is that so if Juno, of course, is against Aeneas, and so that puts her on the side of the Rutulians in this case.
Right.
Io represents, again, something hateful to Juno.
Yes.
And so I think we can see something of kind of a foreshadowing of tragedy for Turnus in that.
Definitely.
Even the goddess that is on his side, she's using him
Right.
for a particular event, but then will discard him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be the plaything of the gods.
No.
Right? They're not your friend for long.
Right. So last time, we were talking about what kind of set up this conflict. I think it was Iulus Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, had gone hunting, and he had wounded and killed this stag that was precious to some of the Latin shepherds.
Yes, and it was Juno, actually, a detail we neglected to mention last time, but it was Juno who set Ascanius's hounds
Oh, yes.
after the stag.
Right.
So there was that little sort of nudge that makes the hounds of Ascanius as he's hunting chase this stag, and then war breaks out.
Right. And so, and it starts out as kind of this little skirmish, you know, a fight over the sacred or special animal, and then the domino effect kicks in, and
Correct.
it becomes much bigger. So the shepherds, and then Turnus himself. Remember, Turnus is now under also the influence of Amata, it's not Amata, but Alecto,
Right.
the Fury, but goaded on by Amata, his would-be mother-in-law. And they want war. And so they go to Latinus and say, hey, this is getting out of control.
Right.
We don't like these invaders. Declare war. Let's push them out.
That's right. You can't stand for this. Look at the trouble they're causing.
Right. And so Latinus he's kind of on the knife edge. I mean, he was the one who welcomed these Trojans, right? And kind of very quickly kind of promised his daughter to Aeneas.
Based on the prophecy that his father Faunus had received.
Exactly.
About the oracle of the man who would come in and establish the race as something great, being Aeneas, of course.
And, but that is completely at odds with what's happening right now in front of him.
Right.
So he's made promises that he can't really walk back, and so he throws up his hands and he decides, I am not going to declare. I'm not going to open these gates, and so it falls to Juno to do it herself.
Right.
So Latinus goes back inside the palace, throws up his hands. He doesn't want to deal with it. Juno descends to open these gates. And Dave, would you give us a little Latin here?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So this is beginning at line 601 in Book 7, 601. And I'm using here the critical edition, the text that's in the Oxford Classical Texts. I know that you're familiar with this one, and it's edited by R.A.B. Minors. Why do I mention that?
Why indeed?
Because guys like Minors, M-Y-N-O-R-S, they did the hard work, of establishing what the actual text of Virgil was.
Yeah.
And I think he's kind of an unsung hero. So I'm singing him a little bit here.
Fantastic.
All right. So beginning here at line 601. Mos erat asperien latioquem protinus urbes, alba nae caluere sacrum nunc maxima rerum, romocalit cum prima movent in proelia martem, sivegetis in ferdre menu lacrimabile bellum, herca nis varabis veparant sel tenderad indos, auroram quesequi partos que reposca resigna.
Nicely done, as always.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to draw attention to just one little bit here, which
Please.
is line 604. Line 604 ends with these words, lacrimabile bellum. So a war that you have to cry over. It's worthy of tears, lacrimabile, right?
Yeah.
So the Latin lacrima meaning a tear, and then with the adjectival form here, something you want to weep over.
Right. Yeah.
Weep worthy. I don't know if that's an English word, but weep worthy war.
I think that, I think that phrase speaks to some of these tendencies in Virgil that we've seen, right? This is a book, this is an epic that doesn't glorify war for war's sake, right? And I think that's often kind of a cliche and a trope that's applied to the Romans. You know?
Absolutely,
the Greeks
and to
were
the Greeks.
well, yeah, but also I think kind of there's also this. The Greeks were the thinkers, the philosophers, and the Romans were the bloodthirsty,
right?
The killers and road builders.
Yes,
right?
They were just brutes, like a machine rolling across the landscape.
Right, and so I think the Aeneid, time and time again, is an antidote to that. Right?
Absolutely,
right.
Yeah, this is one of the things that first drew me to Virgil so much, and the Romans generally, is that when you have to do something nasty, like war, you should do it well, but never lose sight of the fact that it's inherently despicable and unpleasant.
Right.
And there's so much pathos in that. I find that such a great reflection of life generally. Virgil does not glorify war, but if Aeneas is called to engage in war, well, he's going to do it very well. This is a theme we've talked about before in the podcast.
Right.
He's going to do it very well, even though he hates doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's a nasty business.
Yeah, isn't that a core tenet of pietas?
Yes.
It's that Roman duty.
Right.
You have to do the things that you don't necessarily want to do.
And to digress for a moment, when the Gladiator movie came out, I guess almost 25 years ago now.
I think it came out in 2000.
Yeah, so it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
People would ask me at the time, since I was a grad student, is that true to Roman history? What do you think of that movie? The general take would be, it was loose with a lot of facts, but I do think it captured the spirit of the Romans quite well.
Yeah.
Because the main character does not enjoy being the best gladiator.
Yeah.
He hates it, right? The famous, "Are you not entertained?"
Right.
He hates doing it, but that's no reason not to do it well.
Right.
And that's quintessentially Roman, I would say.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I think we got to treat that in an episode, right? That movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As one of our recent shout-outs, he actually suggested that.
Yes, he did. He did.
We'll get on that.
All right.
Let me give you some of Lombardo's translation.
Love to hear it.
It's a bit long, but I think it sets up a lot of what we want to talk about in terms of the gates of war and this god Janus. I would say as you were reading the Latin and I'm looking over the translation, I think this is one of these places where, despite the Homeric model, Virgil wants to make it very clear that there are many things that are kind of quintessentially Italian, quintessentially Roman. I think this is one of them, right? The gates of war, and then also even the god Janus.
Yeah, so if I can just add to that, I know we're delaying the reading of the quote, but there's an old parlor game in which you try to match a line of Virgil to a specific line of Homer. And many of Virgil's lines of poetry are almost quotations or translations of individual lines of Homer. Obviously, with the exception of this kind of content, as you so ably pointed out.
Yeah.
So it's an imitation of Homer, but there are parts where Virgil wants us to know, this is my project.
Without a doubt.
This is uniquely Italian, you might say.
Yeah, he's his own man.
Right.
Yep. All right. Lombardo then. There was a custom in ancient Latium, held sacred by the Alban cities and now by Rome most high, whenever Mars is first roused, be it the Getae or Arabs or Hyrcanians, against whom they prepare to bring the tears of war. There's that phrase.
What is it? Lacrimabile bellum.
Yes. Or to march on India, pursue the dawn, and reclaim their eagles from the Parthians. There are twin gates of war, so men call them, sanctified by faith and fear of Mars, held shut by 100 bronze bolts, and the eternal strength of iron. Janus, their guardian, never leaves the threshold. Here, when the fathers declare war, the consul, wearing quirinal robes and a toga with a gabine cincture, unbars the grating doors and calls forth war. The rest of the army then takes up the cry, and brass horns blare in hoarse accord. Latinus was charged to declare war on Aeneas in just this way and open the grim gates, but the old man would not touch them, recoiling from such service, and hid himself in the shadows. It was the queen of the gods gliding down from the sky, who with her own hand pushed the hesitant doors on their turning hinges and burst open the iron-bound gates of war.
Well done, and what a brilliant translation.
Isn't that nice?
Yes.
I'm looking at this, and maybe if you have the Latin in front of you, I'm just kind of curious what the word is.
Sure.
When at the very end, when it says that Juno glides down and with her own hand pushed the hesitant doors, I'm wondering,
Right.
is it that same word? Is it that cunctantum that they had on the bow from book 6?
It's morantis.
Morantis, okay.
Morantis. It's the verb moror, right? It's a deponent verb to delay.
Delay, yeah.
Yeah, and here as a participle, morantis.
Right. Okay, I was hoping for a direct.
You were hoping that it would be like the
right.
bow, the cunctantem.
Yeah, but I would say that, I mean, that using that verb, see if you agree with me, that again, it's Virgil saying that you want to keep these doors closed.
Absolutely.
Right? You don't throw them open. It's
Right.
like war is not something to be sought. And so
Right.
the doors themselves kind of, they delay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that in ideological terms, you might say, it's easy to want to make someone like Virgil after our own image.
Yeah.
Either he's a Western warmonger, people might say, celebrating the advance of Western civilization under the Romans, crushing indigenous peoples.
Right.
That's altogether too simplistic.
Yes.
But to call him a pacifist is also kind of absurd, right? There is something in between that is someone who hates war but thinks that reluctantly it has to be done sometimes.
Yes.
And I think the morantis there, that adjective you put your finger on, shows well Virgil's mind.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. That whole kind of issue of wanting to read the ancients through the prism of our own worldview. As
Right.
well. In some ways, it's unavoidable. Of
course.
But I think it's kind of a trap that I think a lot of people fall into.
Sure.
I was in with a group of people a couple of weeks ago, and the discussion.
You want to read their names in the air?
I do not. And the discussion turned around to the New Testament, the letters of Paul, and,
Right.
and kind of theology. And there's one kind of more cranky guy in the group,
Okay.
who kind of just berated. He says he wanted nothing to do with Paul. And well, why is that? Well, because of his aggressive sexism.
Yeah.
Right. And so I used my usual line. I said, "Well, are you upset that he also never recycled?"
Right. Touche.
Right.
That's a good one.
And we had actually a productive conversation about that.
After that
Yes.
retort of yours?
Right. And I mean, he admitted kind of it was kind of a gut reaction, but we
Yeah.
talked about kind of the issue of presentism, right?
Right.
Yeah. If the people from the past aren't perfect in your eyes the way you
Right.
think that they should be, then therefore they are lesser.
Yeah, and they have nothing to contribute to the conversation.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well said.
Yep. So I found another article from Michael Putnam, also from Tappa, where he writes about book 7 of the Aeneid, but he addresses this notion of the gates of war and kind of connects it to kind of the Virgil's Roman present.
So Tappa's really just representing today, isn't it?
Maybe we could get a. I don't.
I don't think so.
They wouldn't sponsor a thing. Would they? No way.
They wouldn't touch us with a 10-foot hosta, right?
So why don't I read this excerpt
Okay.
from this article, which is called Aeneid 7 and the Aeneid. It's not, I don't give Putnam points for clever titles.
No.
It's pretty dull. But he writes, it was one of Augustus's proudest boasts. It was incorporated into his res gestae that the Temple of Janus was closed 3 times during his regime, whereas in all Roman history up to his time had happened but twice before. In the same work, he also gives his thoughts on war and peace from the res gestae. And he quotes a bit of the Latin. And he said, let's just read the Latin here. Bella terra et mari civilia externaque toto in orbe terrarum, suscepi victorque omnibus superstitibus civibus perpeci, externas gentis quibis tuto ignosci potuit, conservare quam excidere malavi.
Very nice.
And he keys and he says, the crucial adjective tuto, which he translates in safety, in the second sentence may be defended as a sop to necessary expediency.
Now, you're going to have to unpack that a little bit. You got some archaic words there, and I know, once again, brilliant audience, but I don't want to leave anyone behind. What does he mean, defended as a sop to necessary expediency?
I think he's saying that, I think he's talking about that Augustus's words, he's justifying war
Okay.
because of the benefits that it brings.
Okay.
And so he brought the whole war, the world into safety, made the world safe. So,
And a sop, of course, right, is like a bowl of oatmeal.
a bowl of oatmeal, that's what you think of when you think of sop?
A sop is a kind of a soft food that you offer to someone
Right.
in order to appease them.
Yeah, just kind of you kind of toss it in their direction. Here,
That's
chew on
correct.
this. Like, I think of it like here's a box of Twinkies.
Okay.
You shove them in your mouth and shut up.
Right. You talking to me?
You talking? By the way, I just showed Taxi Driver in my film class.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Come on, you know what?
No, I don't.
No, never mind. All right.
Sop to necessary expediency.
Right. The first statement is more open to doubt. We are dealing with times which Tacitus called a pacem cruentam. So you just talked about the tearful war.
That's correct.
Tacitus calls a pacem cruentam a bloody peace.
That's right. This is from his Annales, Book 1.
Yes. In the same paragraph, Tacitus, while talking of Augustus, raises a moral issue which has some bearing on the end of the Aeneid. Okay, finally, Putnam gets around to connecting to our text. It is morally correct, the historian says, Tacitus, to give up private hatreds in favor of public needs. Privata odia publicis utilitatibus remittera. In Tacitus's eyes, Augustus was in this respect constantly delinquent. What of Virgil's Aeneas? Is his killing of Turnus an example of private hatred or of public need?
Right.
Now, of course, this takes us all the way to the end of the Aeneid.
This anticipates the end of Book 12, in which, spoiler alert, Aeneas kills Turnus in what could be described as an act of impulsive bloodlust.
Yes. Right. So I think that issue of or Tacitus's notion that it is moral that you give up private hatreds in favor of public needs.
That's right.
And so that you can never let your own kind of private axis to grind govern how you govern.
Yes. Yeah. This is what distinguishes good from bad leadership. Mm-hmm. And I can cite an example from American history.
Yes.
I don't know how true it is, but it is the conventional wisdom that Abraham Lincoln, when he was elected to office, made up his cabinet, right, from political rivals. Yes. And he said the best way, words to this effect, the best way to defeat an opponent is to make them a friend.
Yeah.
So he was apparently very good at bridging gaps.
Yes.
I mean, not with Southerners, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes. I read that. I think the book is called A Team of Rivals.
I think that's right.
A biography of Lincoln was excellent. And just to kind of extend that, I think that's a great comparison. The guy that was at Lincoln's bedside when he died, I think his Secretary of War.
Was it Charles Sumner?
It was Edwin somebody.
Okay.
I'm forgetting his last name, but he was someone who was not a fan of Lincoln at all. And he's the one who's credited with saying the line when Lincoln's heart stopped, saying, now he belongs to the ages. And so that his kind of bitter rival was sitting at his deathbed. I think it's a really striking culmination of that philosophy.
Yeah, of the Tacitian notion that private hatreds have to yield to the public good.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that's very much missing from contemporary politics writ large. And so but Tacitus also, if you know anything about Tacitus, he didn't like anybody.
No.
Right? He didn't have
call it senatorial historiography.
Yeah.
And we should do an episode on Tacitus sometime.
We should. And so Augustus, so he was kind of a counter to kind of the myth of Augustus.
Correct.
Right? And so he was he grumbled about Augustus and he did not live up to that particular ideal.
Right. And the point for Virgil is that in his Res Gestae, Augustus gives an account of his reign and how it is that he came to power. And Tacitus is saying Augustus is being a little bit dishonest, a little bit immoral, because he never evidenced this very important trait of leadership. Private hatred has to submit to public good.
Yeah.
So then Putnam's question is, does Aeneas do this in the Aeneid? Does he put private hatred above public good?
Right. With a particular eye to the very last scene of
Correct.
And I think that's again, we'll cover this, probably 46 episodes from now.
Correct.
Right? But I think it's one of those questions that hangs over the end of the Aeneid that people have asked, did Virgil really intend to end it there?
Right.
And I think one of the reasons people ask that question because this seems to be so incongruous with that kind of that Tacitian ideal.
And generally dissatisfying as the end of an epic.
Right.
So now, because Latinus would not open the gates of war on this Temple of Janus himself, Juno comes down and nudges them open. War is unleashed. But what about the temple itself, Jeff? Where is this temple located?
The real deal, the real temple, yes. Right down in the Roman Forum. And if I recall correctly, I don't think there's much left of this temple there. And so it marked kind of the boundary of the Roman Forum. And during kind of Augustus's day, it was the transition point between the Roman Forum and the forum of his adopted grand uncle Julius Caesar, right? And it was the doors to the Temple of Janus, and these were the doors that were almost in Roman history almost always open,
which means that the Romans are at war.
Right, and so the fact that Augustus was credited with closing them 3 times was a huge deal.
Right. Isn't there a clock in Times Square in New York City that has the amount of the national debt?
Yes.
It's always running.
It's always running.
I don't know if I've ever seen that. I think I've been to New York City maybe twice. Dave versus New York City.
Yeah.
Got out of there quickly. But I think there's a clock right there, and it's just constantly spinning, right? And
The debt clock.
that's right. On a hot summer day, if you walk by the speed of the digits, you can cool yourself off. This has to be something like the gates of war being open, right? It's a very public, obvious, conspicuous example of something that affects everybody.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was trying to think of different kind of corollaries. I think like a symbol like a flag at half staff.
Yes, I was
right?
thinking of that too.
Yeah. Just kind of a visual reminder of the debt, the overwhelming amount of the debt, and a flag at half staff, the costs of war.
Right. It's supposed to be symbolic. Or every day, the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier.
Yeah.
I think that people don't think about those kinds of things very much, and certainly we don't witness them firsthand because they're very geographically specific,
right?
Just like the Temple of Janus was. But if you're living out in the Italian hinterlands, you probably have some connection, right? It's the 7 degrees of Gaius Julius or something. You know someone who knows someone who walked past the temple today, and the gates are still open.
Right.
So somewhere, someplace, Roman soldiers are dying.
Yes, exactly. And then, so by contrast, the closing of the gates would be even more monumental because it's so rare.
Correct. How many times did it happen during Augustus's reign?
3 times.
Okay.
It said. And I think the passage that we just read, that before Augustus, it had only been closed 2 different times.
In all of Roman history?
All of Roman history. Right? And so the quasi-legend is that the temple, the gates were built by Numa Pompilius.
Right.
So this would be, in terms of the Aeneid, long after that.
Yes, long about 720.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And so Latinus has these gates, but the gates that, archaeologically, historically speaking, were said to have been created by Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome, and he's famous for kind of civilizing kind of barbaric Rome.
Oh, yeah. We talked about him once when we were talking about Pythagoras and vegetarianism, right, from Ovid.
Oh, yeah.
Because Numa was a contemporary, according to Ovid, of Pythagoras. So he civilizes Rome, gives them laws and religion, and succeeds in what? In building this temple to the god Mars.
To the god Mars, right? With the intention that I think the clear subtext is that, oh, you Romans, the goal should be to keep these gates shut.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's a public monument with an educational purpose.
Right. So it reminds me of, in my myth class today, I was just talking about Kekrops for the Athenians. Kind of quasi-semi-legendary king.
Yes, he is the snake from the waist down. Right.
The snake part is particularly legendary.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
You're not convinced?
He said to have brought in the notions of marriage and monogamy and turn away from a human sacrifice, worship the Olympian gods. And so it's an archetype, the early king who kind of brings order out of chaos. Right. And Numa falls into that for the Romans.
And we have some record of Numa's life, don't we, from Plutarch?
Yeah. He wrote a life of Numa. Let me read a passage from this which talks about this very thing we are discussing. Janus also has a temple at Rome with double doors, which they call the gates of war, for it always stands open in time of war, but is closed when peace has come. The latter was a difficult matter, and it rarely happened, since the realm was always engaged in some war, as its increasing size brought it into collision with the barbarous nations which encompassed it round about. But in the time of Augustus it was closed, after he had overthrown Mark Antony, and before that, when Marcus Attilius and Titus Manilius were consuls, it was closed for a short time, and then war broke out again at once, and it was opened. So,
and the tradition for the declaration of war, right? You're familiar with this tradition. The gates of Janus are opened, and then the consul takes a spear and hurls it into the temple at the statue of Janus.
Man, with the intention of piercing it?
No, it's just an act of aggression.
Okay.
It's just showing the Romans are headed to war. It's a highly symbolic gesture.
Yeah. I would hope that consul would have, you pick one of the 2 consuls that have the better aim.
Yeah, you'd think so.
You don't want some kind of embarrassing faux pas of
no,
throwing
you don't.
it over the temple.
And now axe throwing has become really popular.
I've seen that around town. There's places it's a great date night. You and your bride could go out axe throwing.
That's right.
Yeah.
I guess it's replaced bowling. I guess I would find it more interesting than bowling.
I would too. I find most things actually.
Right.
Yeah,
sleeping.
Right. So even Nero himself made a show of closing the gates of war once, and times of peace is not what people usually associate with the Emperor Nero.
No, but his quinquennium, as we know, the first 5 years
were good.
Were very good on the whole.
Yep. And so there's a a famous striking of coinage where he depicts the Temple of Janus with the doors closed.
Nero.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
So on one side is his image. On the other side, the Temple of Janus. Gates closed, meaning I have brought peace.
I have brought peace.
The Pax Neroniana.
Right. So can we talk a little bit about Janus?
Yes, let's do this, because this is a topic near and dear to your heart, because it brings out the L word.
The L word, yes. He's our liminal figure.
That's correct. Liminality. Can you define that a little bit for those who haven't been listening to every episode in which it's mentioned?
So liminality refers to kind of unbounded in-betweenness. And you find this in cultures around the world. It's not just the Greeks, not just the Romans. You find it everywhere, kind of an anxiety about boundaries. And so, we were talking about the chimera, that creature. I think every time you have a creature that's made up of different pieces, so chimera is a lion, it's a goat, it's a snake, it's whatever, it's an eagle, it's all of those, but it's none of them.
Correct.
And so one of the things that makes those things unsettling and scary is that they are unbounded.
You can't tie it down somewhere in your mind.
Right.
Put it into a nice, neat box.
Right. It's why puppets can be very creepy.
Yes.
Right? Or ventriloquist dummies.
Right.
Are they human? Are they not human? They live in that kind of that Freudian uncanny.
Or when you come to your home in the evening, right? And it's not quite night, it's not quite day, and the door is locked, and you're fumbling for your keys. Right? That's a liminal moment.
Deeply liminal.
Right, because you want the safety and comforts of your home. You're not real comfortable necessarily being outside. It's great uncertainty.
It is. I find that kind of that prickly feeling on the back of my neck. Sometimes even when I go down at night to turn off the basement lights and I'm walking up the steps.
You're a real scaredy cat, aren't you?
I think I'm tuned into that. I've seen too many horror movies. Is my problem.
So.
Right? Yeah. So I wouldn't say I'm a scaredy cat.
That's what I would call you. Felis timida.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I prefer Johnny Pop.
All right.
Right. So just as a physical location, the Temple of Janus, between two forums, marks the boundary. So it's a liminal space. It's a threshold that to get from one side to the other, you need to cross or go past. And so if you want the symbolism of the doors being closed, the boundary is fixed. This is good. It's in control.
Right.
But when the doors are open, then kind of there's that it's the gray area. It's liminal. It's scary. It's unpredictable. That's associated with war, right? So I think that's an important distinction. So why are the doors shut for peace? And why are the doors open for war? Couldn't it be just the opposite? Well, from a point of view of liminality, understanding kind of that symbolism, the closed door would be the one that you want because that fixes the boundary.
Right. And the open door would mean things are uncertain.
Things are uncertain.
Could be coming or going.
Right. So the god Janus, who is usually depicted as being two-headed.
Yes.
Looking both ways. Sometimes there are examples where there's 4 heads and each head is kind of looking down one of the cardinal points.
Okay.
That shows it's similar to we've talked on the show about like the Hermes. You place the statue of Hermes at the crossroads or at the threshold.
Right.
Janus is the two-headedness. So he can look down both ways.
Correct.
He's got the boundary covered, and so he's exactly the kind of god you want at that threshold because he can watch over it unblinkingly and control it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, unlike many of the Roman gods, there was no Greek counterpart to Janus.
No. And Janus, as a deity, doesn't have a lot of kind of narrative myth attached to him. He's more just kind of functional for providing protection and overseeing of those kinds of spaces. So he's defined as a god of beginnings,
right,
of gates, obviously here, transitions, time, duality, doorways, passages, frames, beginnings and endings. So a lot of those have to do with kind of going from space to space, crossing thresholds, right?
Both of space and time, right? People like to mark the beginnings of things. I was involved in a conversation recently, not quite as inflammatory as the one that you recounted about Paul and his doctrines and positions.
Yeah.
But this was about the acceptability of graduation events for the very young, right? Can we have a 5th grade graduation? Well, what about a kindergarten graduation? What about a preschool graduation?
Right.
These were not things that existed when you and I were preschoolers.
No.
But this individual, this young woman, was holding forth on just how bad these are because they hadn't accomplished anything. So why are they getting a graduatory moment?
Right.
And the other individual was saying, well, because when you dress kids up in tiny little robes, it's so cute. But I think the common thread there, so to speak, the common thread in the robe is the liminality.
Yes.
You want to mark something there. Now you got me talking liminality.
Yeah.
You want to mark that the child has gone from preschool to school.
Right.
So you have to have a ceremony.
Exactly, right.
And Janus is the kind of individual who would love to preside over that ceremony.
Exactly. I fundamentally disagree with what you said was a young woman who was saying how silly this was.
Yeah.
Right.
You like it?
I like it a lot.
You do?
And as someone who's sat through 3 kindergarten graduations of my own children, and I admit kind of sitting there and kind of, not quite rolling my eyes, but I recognize. I think rites of passage are important.
They are important,
and I think that, and particularly I think that as Western society continues to secularize, I think we're losing a lot of those kind of fundamental rites of passage that would be part of a religious tradition, be that kind of confession of faith, a confirmation.
You're right.
Right. But
bar mitzvah.
Bar mitzvah. I mean, but I think you see it even like in like the Mexican tradition of a quinceañera. Right. Your 15-year-old is kind of now you're a transition to womanhood. I think those things are very important.
Fair.
Yeah.
I think I've put my finger on what the problem with it is.
Okay.
It's not the rite of passage. It's that it is treated as a singular accomplishment.
Oh, I see.
If there's some way that they could take, and I didn't necessarily agree with this young woman, I'm indifferent to the notion, but if you could somehow take out of it the concept that this is a singular accomplishment and focus on the fact that it is a rite of passage,
okay,
so that mere survival and perseverance in something is a good.
Yeah.
You're not saying that this child has done something fantastic by moving inevitably from one stage of life to the next.
Right.
It's not a participation trophy. It's a simple rite of passage. I think people could get behind it a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important distinction. It makes me think of amongst upper class Roman young men, they were given usually age around 15. They gave the toga virilis, right? They got
That's
the man's
correct.
toga. And
the one that has the purple stripe on it.
And
now you're entitled to the purple stripe.
Right. And one of the rituals there was they had the bulla, the pouch that was around their neck,
Correct.
which was filled with all kinds of apotropaic warding off symbols,
Right.
cut off. And I think that we were talking this.
So now you're on your own is kind of I wasn't aware of that tradition. So they would wear around their necks a pouch. bulla.
Yes.
And it had apotropaic symbols in it.
It did.
Amulets.
Right. And because I think what the Romans recognized, I think as every culture that's ever existed recognized, is the time of adolescence, although it's defined differently by cultures, is a time of liminality.
Right.
Right. And so that time where, in the immortal words of Britney Spears, I am not a girl, but I'm not yet a woman, right? And so that time of sleep,
it's disturbing to hear you say that.
I'm sorry. So we're going to edit it out. No, we won't. But we were talking about this months ago with Gary Schmidt.
Yes.
And we were talking. I was asking him, why,
years ago now, actually.
Yeah. I think I asked him, almost all of your novels deal with kind of kids in that middle school age, right? And it's that. I don't think he used those terms, but it's the liminality, that kind of that gray area of kind of who you are and trying to figure out who you are is very interesting.
Correct.
Right. And so I think we need rites of passage to kind of delineate these things. I think it's important for the health of a culture to do those.
So we're going to bring it right back around to Janus in just a moment.
Yes.
But I would like to say that the rituals that have filled the gap of the departing religious rituals, they're so phony, honestly.
Yeah.
The things that are made up as rites of passage, I can't think of any specific examples, but you will hear from time to time of persons trying to come up with rites of passage because they notice something's missing.
Right.
But it takes a long time for these things to settle into the human mind.
Yeah.
And anything new is just going to come off as forced.
I would agree with that. I think if there's rites of passage, like a more secular rite of passage,
right, would
have to be organic.
Correct.
Right. And so with this kind of I know we're deeply digressing here, but I think
it's your fault.
This relates. And so some of the work that I've been doing on urban legends, one of the particular things I'm fascinated about is this thing that folklore is called legend tripping. Right. You not only retell the story, you kind of go and engage in the story. You
like
go
a pilgrimage.
Yeah, you go to the cemetery at midnight. And you run around the tombstone 3 times. At a glance, it seems very silly and very adolescent. But my argument would be is that who's doing these kinds of things? it's adolescents. It's kids who are kind of trying to prove their adulthood. It's usually guys,
Right.
trying to prove their mettle, prove their courage,
Right.
And they're not thinking of it in these lines, but what they're doing is they're creating rites of passage. They're making a little hero's journey. They're facing death in this safe kind of way, scaring themselves and going there and coming back. That's a rite of passage,
Right.
And that's one that's very organic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of rites of passage,
Yes?
it's time for the ads.
Let's do it.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Jeff, what do you know about Ratio Coffee?
I know a lot about ratio.
Well, give me just one factoid. Throw it on me.
I know that I love my ratio 8.
Okay.
It produces a great cup of coffee every single morning.
Would you call this a brewmance?
I do have a brewmance with my machine. Yes. Yeah. How about you?
Well, in the immortal words of Cinderella,
Yes.
don't know what you got till it's gone.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, don't worry. The Ratio 8 is still there, safely nestled on my countertop.
Thank goodness.
But last night we had some friends over, and I was not in charge of the coffee brewing.
Oh no.
And when I'm not in charge of the coffee brewing, some members of the family have better ideas. They honestly do, frankly. And we had a lot to brew, so they used that older machine.
Oh no.
It was my fault. I didn't really explain how you could use the 8 in this, in this particular setting and context.
Yes.
And the coffee was, let's just say, okay.
Did it ruin the evening?
No, it didn't. The evening just sped along beautifully.
Yes.
And we made do, but I just couldn't help but think how much better the coffee would have been.
Yes.
Had it been brewed in the Ratio 8.
I see. Yeah, I noticed that too. Whenever I get coffee from with this
Elsewhere,
or from like a large gathering, and they have kind of the giant tank.
Yes.
Oh, the tank
With
coffee.
a little spigot at the bottom.
Oh, it's always bad.
Typically the things that go to the bottom of anything are not what you want to consume.
No, it's very, very true.
Right.
So, listeners, I mean, I'm sure you've had this problem.
I'm sure they have.
If you want to avoid it, go to ratiocoffee.com. They've got these 2 wonderful machines, the 6 and the 8. They're beautiful. They make the perfect cup of coffee every single time.
Fibonacci head.
Fibonacci head, the hand-blown borosilicate carafe.
The metallic veins.
Yes.
Through which the water courses at 200 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Down through the cone, into the carafe, never touched by a scorch pad.
Never. And you got the bloom with the brew.
Right.
Right.
And then the ready stage with a little LED light.
Yeah. It's beautiful in its simplicity.
Yeah, and entirely functional. And from it will be missing that malodorous, nostril clogging, intensely displeasant
brackish tang.
There you go.
That's it. So go to ratiocoffee.com, pick one of these machines, or pick them both if you want to, and type in the coupon code ANCOK5.
Right. And the K stands for kitchen.
Yes.
Because it's going to make your kitchen fantastic.
That's right. So punch that in, and that'll get you 15% off your entire order.
ANCOK5. You will be getting great coffee and supporting this podcast.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Hackett Publishing. For 50 years now, these guys have been doing it, producing, supplying great translations, wonderful translations. If you have been enjoying the Lombardo translation from the Aeneid episodes, that's done by Hackett.
Yes, you will have heard how Stanley Lombardo can take Virgil's gorgeous poetry and turn it into riveting, colorful, incredible rendition in English of this fantastic poem.
Right. And if you want that text, and if you were to go to hackettpublishing.com and look it up, you're not going to find some leather-bound, a tome that's selling for $175 like you might find in lots of racks with textbooks. You're going to find a very affordable volume. One of the things I love about Hackett is that they work really hard to create a quality product, but within reach of almost any budget.
That's correct. They have a wide catalog of not just classics, but things from Central American and South American studies. They have Near Eastern and Asian studies, books on the samurais. They have a new Aristotle series. They've got Plato. They have the Landmark series of the Greek historians. Phenomenal catalog of wonderful material.
Right, and even multiple translators of the same work. So you can kind of, even within one particular text, you can kind of see what you like, see what hits. And so, listeners, if you want to help this podcast and you want to get some of these great texts and get a great deal, go to hackettpublishing.com. That's HACKETT publishing.com. Find the books that you want, drop them in the little satchel, and type in the coupon code AN2022.
Where did that number come from?
That's the year that we're in right now.
Right.
And so put that in, and that will get you two tremendous things: 20% off your entire order, and Dave,
Free shipping.
there it is.
Check it out. All right, Jeff, as we get back into it now, we're talking Janus and the Temple of War.
The Temple of War. So I think we were talking about how Janus is a kind of quintessentially Roman god. There's not a lot of narrative about him in myth. He doesn't have lots of stories behind him. One of the traditions is that he's the father of the goddess Kaida, the goddess of hinging, hinges, right? So again, also having to do with doors. You may think that the whole family of Janus.
She was a bit of a swinger, right?
Exactly right. I was thinking the whole family of Janus could be like a whole Home Depot, right? They had the son of the knobs,
right,
and locks, and
you looking for some comic potential in there?
I think there's something there. I haven't quite found it yet.
I think Weird Al already did it with his song "A Hardware Store."
Oh, I don't even know that one.
You got to listen to that.
What is this? What's it a spoof of? Or is
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it's an original.
Original. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. This sounds right up Weird Al's alley here. But there is one kind of interesting story that Janus played a role in kind of the foundation story of Rome around the time of the war with the Sabines.
That's correct. The rape of the Sabine women.
Yep. So we learned that after Romulus, the founder of Rome, and has been kidnapped by the Sabine women.
Not kidnapped by, right?
Oh, sorry, kidnapped the Sabine women. Yes, right. And Rome was attacked by the Sabines under King Tatius. Janus caused a volcanic hot spring to erupt, resulting in the would-be attackers being buried alive in the deathly hot, brutal water and ash mixture of the rushing hot volcanic springs that killed, burned, or disfigured many of Tatius's own men. This spring is called Lautolae by Varro. Later on, however, the Sabines and Romans agreed on creating a new community together. So Janus shows up as kind of an early defender of this Roman project by sucking them in and burning them with kind of volcanic liquid.
So to bring the audience up to speed, just to make sure we're on the same page, the Romans founded their dynasty, and they had no brides. So Romulus and his men invited their neighbors, the Sabines, to a games, right, a athletic contest, and said, "Bring along your unmarried daughters, just because." Then stole them and forced them to become their brides.
Right.
And at this point, Janus intervenes and defends the guilty Romans against the revenge of the Sabine fathers.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. So Janus, as a god that was worshipped or invoked by the Romans, most prayers and ceremonies that the Romans conducted would begin with an invocation to Janus. So Janus is the god of beginnings. So it makes sense. He and also the name Janus is related to the Latin word for a door, right?
Correct.
Janua. We get our word janitor from, like a doorman.
As well as January, the month, right? Because it looks forward to the new year and it looks back to the preceding year.
Right. So the Roman year at one point began in March, right? But then when the calendar shifted, then January becomes the first month of the year, as we practice now.
Right.
So he was often invoked first, and as I learned, I did not know this, but an invocation to Vesta was often how they ended prayers, as kind of a praise of community,
right?
And kind of bringing it all back home, as it were. And so Janus was a god that would give you access to other gods.
Okay.
And so even a prayer wasn't necessarily to Janus. You might be wanting to invoke Mars or Jupiter or Juno. You would begin with Janus because he would kind of help you cross the threshold, spiritually speaking.
Got it.
Yeah. And it reminds me of even though the Greeks didn't have a god like this, I think you find that concept elsewhere. So even like in Roman Catholic imagery of Peter holding the keys, it comes from that biblical passage where Jesus says to him, the keys of heaven and hell I give to you.
Matthew 16.
Right. But that's been translated into, every cartoon that you've seen of Peter at the pearly gates, right? Controlling access to heaven, which of course is not biblical at all.
Right.
But the holder of the keys controlling that threshold, he plays a kind of Janus role, allowing people who's going to get into heaven, who's going to stay out.
Right.
So Janus kind of plays that role.
Interesting.
Yep.
So then we've wrapped up with Janus.
Yeah.
And now we're going on to the end of the book, and we're going to get the catalog of heroes.
That's right.
As the war begins in earnest, and it's like a who's who, right, of the local military talent.
Right. So it reminds me of. What is it? Book 2 of the Iliad.
Correct.
The catalog of ships.
Yes.
And so it's fan service.
Now I find that a modern audience, a contemporary audience, for whatever reason, we can speculate, has very little appetite for catalog poetry.
Oh, without a doubt.
Have you noticed that?
Yes, exactly.
So, the catalog of ships in Book 2, the genealogies in the scriptures, right?
Yes.
The Old and New Testaments.
All the begats.
Right. These are often skipped. And of course, I don't like to do that, especially in the context of sacred literature, but I don't like to do it in the context of secular literature either.
No.
I like the fact that Homer is recounting soldier after soldier, and he came from here with 5 boats, and his grandfather was. It makes it so human. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe it's just an aversion to repetition. This is why people don't like it.
And I think it's kind of the question, okay, where's the plot?
Okay.
I find it like with my students too, is when we do tragedy, they instinctually want to skip the choruses, and because this doesn't move the story along.
Yeah.
And what are they singing about? What are they talking? Why are they bringing up this story?
Right.
That kind of thing. But I think you're right. Is if these kinds of things reward the careful reader.
Yes.
So often you'll find kind of a gem in the middle of that.
Right. Well, I was having this conversation with another individual about the Winnie the Pooh stories.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
How did that come up?
It was about literature.
Okay.
Roughly speaking. And the individual was maintaining, these are great books, the original ones by A.A. Milne. Mm-hmm. And I had a similar criticism as the one you just mentioned, which is there doesn't seem to be any plot.
Right.
That nothing ever happens in Thousand Acre Forest or whatever it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to happen. And the individual's response was, yes, but the author is showing us the character of the individuals in the story, how they're so childlike and innocent. So you learn something about people.
Right.
And I suppose that's charming. So
Yeah.
that is like what you were saying in terms of the catalog poetry. Mm-hmm. It's very humanizing.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever run across that book, The Tao of Pooh?
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah, I use that when I talk about Taoism in my religions class, and we address this that in the Winnie the Pooh stories, very little happens.
Right.
But from the author's point of view, it says, well, that's not the point. The point is that Pooh represents kind of this still point in the middle, kind of that perfect Taoist balance between the wild and the
extreme of Tigger and the extreme of Eeyore.
Exactly right. So that's what's important in the story, and not the plot. I'm by your face. I'm not seeing you buying it.
Sounds a little bit like the job of academics is to find things that aren't there.
That's right. Yeah. Right? Probably. Yeah. Did you grow up on the stories, the Boxcar Children?
No, but I have one child who loves them.
But nothing happens.
Well, I don't know about that. We don't talk about it very much.
They make beans over a fire. That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't talk about it
much. All right, so we have this parade of heroes, and I think it's, this is Virgil giving shout-outs, right?
Right.
To this area. I'm going to bring in your local guy. And so this would be, at recitations and performances, this is like, it reminds me of, we've been in Vatican Square together when the Pope kind of gives the address from his window, right?
With the Jumbotron.
And he'll call out particular groups, right?
Right.
And you get one side cheering, right?
So that's us. The Pope mentioned us.
Right, exactly.
Remember that time he said, and you two guys from West Michigan carting students around for bad pasta, and we cheered and waved.
We did, exactly.
That didn't happen.
No,
audience
it didn't.
says.
No. It's like when the rock band that you come to see, they mention the name of your town from the stage, right? Woo! They know where they are.
Yes. Here's an analog. Just occurs to me. Catalog poetry is like baseball cards.
How so?
Because it's a who's who of the heroes and their exploits in a quantifiable package.
Yeah.
And there's no plot.
Right.
You have to make up all the plot on your own. You've got to fill it in. So, I don't know, Sammy Sosa batted 1,100 last year, something like that, had 35 strikeouts and, I don't know, whatever the 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
You've got to fill in all of the narrative detail on your own because all you got is the stats.
Yeah.
But there are people who love encyclopedic information.
That is true. Yes. And they tend to be men.
Yes. I have a good friend who knows everything about baseball.
Yeah.
And we never talk about baseball. It's not you. Because I find it generally boring.
Okay. Yeah.
He's very interesting in other ways, but he has a encyclopedic knowledge of baseball.
Yeah. I find
that's like catalog poetry.
I think that's right on. Right. I know people like that too, and often they will gravitate towards baseball because just kind of the breadth of the kinds of stats.
Yes.
Right. I think
the obscure and the recherche.
Right. And unlike almost any other sport.
You're right.
Yeah.
So that's it. I think I've identified it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So when you come across the kid, who says, I can't read Hesiod. I can't read book 7 of the Aeneid with this long list of heroes. It's so repetitive. ask them about the NBA or something that's closer to their heart.
Right.
And you'll find the same phenomenon, an endless string of very similar details.
That's really, I like that a lot.
Well, I've trademarked it, so.
Oh, really? I was just saying I'm going to steal that and use that.
Steal at will.
All right, so hey, should we get to the end of this book? All right,
let's do that.
So Turnus himself shows up at the end, and he's wearing this armor that we've alluded to in this episode and the previous episode. Let's talk about it. You want to do a little bit of Latin here?
I would like to. Yep.
Okay.
So this is line 783 and following. Ipsin ter primos praestanti corpora Turnus, vertiter arma tenanes et toto vertica supprest, qui triplici crinita u ba galealta chimairam. Sustinet aetnaios efflantem falcibus ignis, tam magas illa fremens et tristibus effera flammis, quam magas effuso crudescunt sanguina pugnae.
Excellent.
Thank you. I love these last lines here. And they're, what is it? They were crudescunt. They were caked with the poured out blood of battle.
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. Lombardo renders that passage thusly. In the foremost ranks moved Turnus himself, incomparable sword in hand, head crowned with a plumed helmet bearing a chimera that breathes from her jaws Aetnian fires. That would be Mount Etna from Sicily, so locating it locally. Flames all the more fierce, the more blood is shed. On his polished shield, Io, horns uplifted, an emblem blazoned in gold. Io, covered in bristles, already a heifer, with Argus her warden and her father Inachus pouring his stream from a figured urn. So there we have that dichotomy.
Right.
So are you, I think the argument from Stuart Smalley.
Yep.
And
Gale.
M.R. Gale.
And Putnam. Putting them all together.
They were all nice. They were all more or less on the same page about kind of how this kind of speaks to the duality of Turnus. Are you on board with that? Or do we need to kind of see how this all plays out?
I'm still a little skeptical.
Okay.
To me, the most plausible reason why Io is depicted on his shield is just because of the ancestry. In other words, I'm not sure that Io is a symbol of victimhood. It's a symbol of Jupiter's victory, I guess, his, sexual exploit. It's a symbol of Juno's anger. Is it meant to be a symbol of victimhood unto Turnus? This is the part I'm not convinced of.
Really? Okay.
Are you convinced?
I am.
All right.
I am. And I think part of it just because I love stuff like this. So, for example, I'm currently I'm watching a very pulpy show on HBO Max called White Lotus, and it's.
Do you need to give some kind of a audience warning here?
This is not
children's fare.
This is not for kids, and probably not for most adults, to tell you the truth. But you're taking one for the
team.
That's right. I will watch it for you, audience. But one of the things that they do very well in this show is dramatic key events will often play out underneath a Renaissance painting.
Oh,
and it's not like it hits you in the face with it, but if your eye kind of moves from what the character's doing, and it's clearly framed. And you look at, so there was one in front of kind of the death of Saint Sebastian, where he's tied up and covered, shot with the arrows.
Yes.
And if you think about kind of that story, that's clearly commenting on what's happening in the scene, and also perhaps foreshadowing what's going to happen to this guy. So, and I love that kind of stuff. I love that kind of thing.
I do too.
And so it's so you could hear this poem, you could read this, and you can say, oh yeah, Chimera, I know what that's about. I can picture it and enjoy it, but it's also. If you start to think about symbolically and what kind of layer it's adding to the narrative, Virgil says that's kind of a reward.
Okay.
All right. So I do think that kind of Io, that detail that we talked about, Io being a victim of Juno,
right?
And the irony of that, Juno is technically on Turnus' side at this point. I think that sets up kind of a sticky moral dilemma.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm nudged toward it.
Okay.
I'll say.
All right. So we'll see what I mean. We have a lot more Turnus to come. In future episodes, and of course the end of the epic is a fascinating one.
Right.
So we'll hang on to these images.
Right. So shall we get to Camilla now?
Yes. Right. So
at long last.
At long last, and this is how I think this is really striking. Is this is how the book ends?
Right.
It doesn't end with Turnus and his fancy armor.
No.
The last thing is Camilla,
the most impressive and sympathetic warrior, I would say. Or warrior queen, warrior princess.
Yeah.
And it's clear that Virgil has great admiration for her.
Without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah, can I read this bit of Lombardo here?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Do so, yeah.
Thanks. So here goes. Last of all rode Camilla the Volscian, leading her mounted troops and squadrons flowering in bronze. This princess warrior had not trained her hands to women's work, spinning and weaving, but trained to endure the hardships of war and to outrun the wind. She could sprint over a field of wheat and not even bruise the tender ears. could cruise above the open sea's waves and never wet the soles of her feet.
Now, we might just take that literally. Like she's walking on water and she's skimming over fields.
Yes.
She's that fast.
I think we're supposed to take it literally.
Okay.
This is a heroic age.
It is.
Things like this can happen, don't you think so?
I do. I think we haven't really seen anything quite
supernatural?
like this. So with human, there's lots of supernatural stuff going on, right?
All right.
But keep going.
Okay. All the young men, and their mothers too, flocked from their houses and left their fields to watch her ride by, mouths open in wonder at how the royal purple draped her smooth shoulders, how her hair was bound in gold, and how she carried a Lycian quiver and an iron-tipped spear.
Way more impressive than Turnus.
Oh, yes.
Way more, right?
I think it's this combination. The people have this fascination, the combination of beauty and the delicateness of Camilla with the power that's on display as a warrior. It's the incongruity.
Yes.
So Turnus is kind of a hulking brute, right? Described as tall and handsome, but there's something more compelling about someone who is not expected to be like that because she's a young woman and yet has martial prowess.
Agreed. Yes, it's Sigourney Weaver in Alien. She's Ripley.
Haven't
seen it. Okay, but it's that same kind of that duality, that paradox. So, I mean, the question I wanted to ask you is, why do you think Virgil ends the book with Camilla and not with Turnus? Is it just because it's more impressive and it kind of leaves you hanging and it's kind of like, oh, I want to know more about her?
Right.
It's like almost a teaser, or is there something else going on? Again, I'm not fishing for anything. I was just curious if.
Well, I think she's the counterpart of the beautiful Dido in Book 1. So as Book 1 corresponds to 7, 2 to 8, 3 to 9, 4 to 10, etc.
Okay.
In Book 1, we are introduced to the Queen Dido moving around the city of Carthage, this controlling, commanding, beautiful, towering, successful woman. Camilla is her doppelganger.
I gotcha. That's very interesting. We got to make sure in the future books we got to tie it back to their corresponding parts, because I think that's
very interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah,
and it's always interesting when you can use the word doppelganger.
Oh, absolutely. I love that word. Right.
German words are so funny.
Yeah. All right. I think we're up against it, aren't we?
Yes, I think so.
We got to get out of here.
Time to wrap it up. Who's coming in to the vomitorium to use the space today?
Apparently, we're being invaded by Santa's elves.
Santa's elves?
What are they doing in here?
They're going to set up the workshop here in the vomitorium?
Some last minute expansion?
I think so. They need a little extra space to get things done.
Okay, but they do good work, but man, they're annoying.
Yeah. So what's this deal with the elf on the shelf?
Do people still doing that?
I think so. I think you're doing it, in fact.
I'm trying to come up with alternatives to elf on the shelf. Right?
Okay.
So how about Machiavelli in the deli?
All right.
Yeah.
I saw another one, Caesar in the freezer.
Caesar in the freezer is a good one.
These are photoshopped images of various historical figures.
Yes. I also saw Aristotle in the chipotle, which is actually Chipotle.
Oh, Chipotle?
Yeah.
That's lame.
That is lame. I'm actually now sorry that I said it. Yeah.
I'm actually having trouble seeing the script today.
You are?
Yeah, because my glasses broke.
Oh, no.
And I took them to the optometrist to get them fixed.
Yeah.
And guess who I bumped into?
Who?
Everyone.
That is brutal.
That's brutal.
We got to let the audience out of here.
We really got to get out of here.
So you want to say something about Moss Method and LLPSI?
I am going to do so very briefly. You want to study Greek, go from neophyte to erudite, go to mossmethod.com, makes a great present for Christmas and the holidays. Buy someone the chance to learn Greek. It's $325, a great value. Mossmethod.com, free stuff, weekly office hours. Check it out. And if you want to study Latin, Dave...
you should go to latinperdiem.com, right?
Yes, /LLPSI.
That's right.
And check out the program I have on offer there.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks always to Mishka, our great engineer. I'm always astonished by her clean work and the quick turnaround time. It's great stuff.
Thanks to the great musicians who provide the guitar and the intro and outro music. Scott Van Zen, Ken Tamplin. You want to learn to sing like that, play guitar like that, they have programs available to you.
Yes. Hey, if you want a shout out, if you got an idea for an episode, you got questions, you got critiques, drop us a line. You can write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Do not forget the V.
And you can send something to Jeff at adnauseam.com. That's Jeff at symbol adnauseam. Do not forget the V in nauseam.com and let us know what you think.
That's right. Dave, what are we doing next week?
Next week, we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction.
Okay.
And it's going to be a surprise.
Okay. So we're going to step away from the Aeneid for a bit.
For a couple of episodes.
Sounds
That's correct.
Good. And Dave, I think you have our gustatory parting shot.
I do. And this comes from someone named Neil Burton. And he says, the 3 most powerful seasonings: are hunger, variety, and gratitude.
Very solemn.
Yes, it is a little solemn.
But thanks for listening.
Thank you.